So this is not a feel-good class. This is not a pat you on the back, you're a great guy, great person kind of class. This is a more of a wake-up call, like a hit in a positive way, but still a wake-up call. And it's actually a very counter intuitive subject that sort of changes our mindset and perspective on how we're supposed to see success, action, positivity, and many other forms of purpose that we believe we have. And I'll explain that in a minute. Before we do that, I want to take a little exercise. This may or may not work, so forgive me if it doesn't. But I want everyone on this Zoom now to think of the busiest person that you know. Don't mention names, and just picture the busiest person you know. When I say busy, I don't necessarily care busy with what. Just a person who is always preoccupied with something, that their availability is limited, and whether it's work, whatever it is, the busiest person you know, picture that person in your head or write their name down. All right? I'm going to give everyone about 10 or 15 seconds to think of that person. I definitely have that person in mind for myself. I'm sure everyone can think of someone. Okay. The next part of this exercise is I want everyone to think of the most successful person you know. When I say successful, means that they are, the best word to use here would be accomplished. The most accomplished person you know. Accomplished means that their work had the most or maximum impact. In other words, they're someone who the consensus is pretty obvious that they are a very, very accomplished person. All right, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think of that person. And now, what I want to ask, does everyone have a person for each of these two categories? I hope you do. How many of you came to the conclusion of it being the same person? And unmute yourself and let me know, or in the chat, let me know if it's the same person.
No.
Yes, mine was. Mine is not.
We have one of you says it was the same person.
Yes.
Anyone else?
No, not the same person for me.
No. So basically, it's not a given because it's just one of you that have the same person in mind. It's obviously not a given that being busy or being preoccupied or working 24 or workaholic or whatever is necessarily relates to I guess Larry also. So we have two who had the same person. But it sometimes is the case, but not always. It's not a given. In other words, it's not a given that the person who is working the hardest, or busiest, or just constantly up late at night or 2 a.m. and always working is necessarily the most accomplished. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And we're going to discover why that is, because there's not there's not necessarily an automatic correlation between being busy, being always doing something, to always having the maximum impact. And we're going to see that here from the tribes. So in this week's parsha, Jacob is giving a blessing to his children, and it's very interesting how he describes the blessing between Reuven, his firstborn son, and Yehuda. We all know who Yehuda is. And this whole class is going to be about the characteristics of both Reuven and Yehuda and the difference between them. And it's going to be a fascinating perspective as to what personality and character traits they each brought to the table, and which one is the preferred one in certain scenarios. So let's start with Reuven. So Yaakov says, Reuven, you are my firstborn. It always says that the firstborn always has the ultimate representation of the father's strength. But then let's read the verse 4. Verse 4 is where the punchline is. You have the restlessness of water. In other words, like a river. A river never stops flowing. Therefore, you shall not have superiority. You're not the king. In other words, the king was Yehuda. And all of the kings of Israel, even Shaul came from Binyamin, but King David and all of his descendants came from Yehuda. So you're not, in other words, you're restless like water, and because of that, you're not going to be superior. You're not the king. You ascended upon your father's couch, then you profaned who ascended upon my bed. This is a reference to a story that Reuven, and we're going to talk about it throughout the class, so I'll just might as well get it out of the way now. So after Rachel passed away, as we know, when they were traveling back from Lavan's house back to Israel, so Rachel passed away because Yaakov said whoever stole Lavan's idol will be cursed, and everything that Tzaddik says has to have some sort of impact, and therefore Rachel passed away, and she was buried on the road. So Yaakov, even though he was married to Rachel and Leah, but because Rachel was the love of his life, the one that he wanted to marry, so he would his bed was always kept in Rachel's tent. When Rachel passed away, so his bed was moved to Rachel's servant's tent, Bilhah. And Reuven, who was the firstborn, who was a child of Leah, felt that this is not fit. This is disrespectful. And on his own, he went and took his father's bed and brought his bed to Leah's tent. And that was considered to be a sin because he was interfering with his father's intimacy, his father's personal life, and that's not something that he had permission to do. And it was a sin that he repented for tremendously. Okay, and Rashi basically gives us the explanation that I'm sorry, this we talked about already, so let's go to the next text. And these are the words of Rashi. What does it mean you have the restlessness of water? The restlessness and haste with which you hasten to display your anger. You're very emotional. You're an emotional person. In other words, your emotions are sometimes the conductor of your actions, similar to water that hastens on its course. Therefore, you shall not have superiority. You shall no longer receive all these superior positions that were fit for you. In other words, technically speaking, you're the firstborn, so you should be the king. But your personality and your character traits don't match up with it, and therefore it's not going to be destined for you. Now, what was the restlessness that you exhibited? So Rashi says, for you ascended upon your father's couch, then you profaned that name that ascended on my couch. That is the Shekhinah, which was accustomed to going up on my bed. In other words, Yaakov's presence, Yaakov's entire life was connected with the Shekhinah, and therefore, and Reuben interfered with that. Okay, so Reuben did something wrong, but that's not why. What's important to mention here, it's not why he was punished. It's not, sorry, he wasn't punished. It's not why he's not the superior tribe. It's because he reacts. His actions are a reaction of his emotions. It's not because of what he did. We all make mistakes. We all make bad decisions. And King David, bad decision. Yehuda, bad decision. We're going to talk about that soon. That wasn't the point. The problem was that his actions were dictated by his emotions, and that was a problem. So the Gemara explains like this. It was taught in a Braisa. Rav Shimon ben Eliezer says, "What is the meaning of the verse in Reuven lay with Bilhah? That Reuven was intimate with Bilhah, who was one of the concubines of Rachel. Sorry, the concubine of Rachel, which was also technically married to Yaakov." It does not mean that he did it literally. Rather, it means that Reuven protested the affront to his mother that Yaakov's bed was moved into Bilhah's tent. And he said, if my mother's sister Rachel was a rival to my mother's sister's concubine was for sure a rival to my mother. So he immediately stood and rearranged her bed so that Yaakov would enter Leah's tent. Okay, that's the quote unquote sin that Reuven did. But why is this so significant? And by the way, it says very clearly in many other commentaries that Reuven repented for 9 years for this sin. He fasted, and can you imagine how bad this sin is? Like it's like the end of the world, right? But he fasted and he wore sackcloth and ashes, and He didn't, he didn't enjoy any materialism. He was constantly trying to make up for the sin. And it says that he actually was forgiven for the sin 100%. So why is even though the river, the emotions dictating his actions, even though that is all understandable, but why does that disqualify Reuven from being the superior tribe? So let's take a look at what Yaakov blessed Yehuda with. Gur Aryeh, a cub and a grown lion is Yehuda. Yehuda is compared to a lion. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion. And like a lion, who will rouse him? Who's going to start up with him? The scepter shall not depart from Yehuda. Yehuda basically is the superior tribe, and the kingdom will emerge from Yehuda, nor the student of the law from between his feet. In other words, Yehuda will always be the source of Torah study until Shiloh comes, until Mashiach comes, until the end of the days, and to him will be a gatherings of people. And by the way, Yehuda was not just, it was his territory that was closest to the tribe of Binyamin, that's where the temple was, but also after the 10 tribes were lost and kidnapped and taken prisoner, so it was really mostly the Jewish people were mostly the tribe of Yehuda, and that's why the land of Israel was called Judea until the Romans conquered it. It was called Judea. I'm sorry, until the Romans conquered it and then renamed it Palestine after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. But it was called Judea. Why? Because most of the people were from the tribe of Yehuda. So Yehuda is basically the central point of the Jewish people. It doesn't mean that people from the tribe of Binyamin or any other tribe are less Jewish. It means that there's a personality and a character trait that Yehuda embodied. What did he do? What did Yehuda do? I'm gonna mute everyone. But you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have any questions. And just for the background noise to make it easier. But don't hesitate to unmute yourself if you have a question. So now the question is, what did Yehuda do for this honor? Yehuda is basically now being told that his tribe, that his descendants will be kings forever. That the kingdom of Israel will always descend from Yehuda. What did he do for this? What did he do to earn this? So let's take a look. Rashi first tells us, what does it mean you withdrew? What is this idea of withdrawn? What is the gain? So Rashi says, because he said, what is the gain if we slay our brother and cover up his blood? So let's tell a story now. The story is like this. I want to see if there's a graph. There's no graphic, but we're going to tell the story of Yosef's abduction and kidnapping and selling into slavery. And we're going to talk about the different characters that were involved. And I want you to seriously judge who is the good guy, who is the not so good guy, who's the bystander, who's the upstander. I want you all to think in a very unbiased way about who sticks out to you as the most deserving of credit and who deserves the consequence. And by the way, as a fun fact, not a fun fact, but as a side note, it says in one of the midrashim, and we actually mentioned this on Yom Kippur, that when the Romans brought out the 10 martyrs, the 10 sages to be killed after the Bar Kokhba rebellion that we read on Yom Kippur, so one of their excuses is that nobody ever paid for the crime of selling Yosef into slavery, and since that time there was never 10 men who were of great stature like the 10 of tribes, in other words, other than Yosef and Binyamin, that existed until now. And now there's 10 of you that are worthy of the tribes, and you have to pay for the sin of the brothers selling their Yosef into slavery. So this was a very big deal. So what happened? Yosef tells them about his dreams. Yaakov gives a lot of attention, extra attention, and spends a lot of extra time with Yosef and makes him a special coat. He studies with Torah with him, and Yosef is basically the beloved son. And the brothers aren't really happy, and Yosef is constantly, berating them with his dreams about being a king and whatever. We all know that part of it. Yaakov sends Yosef on a mission to go tell his brothers that Yaakov wants to see them because of a certain question of kosher that they were whatever. There was an accusation that they were eating limbs of animals that were taken from alive animals, so they had to come to their father wanted them to come and explain it. So Yosef was tasked with this mission. The brothers already hated him. And when he finally finds his brothers, an angel approaches him on the way and warns him and tells him that his brothers are planning to kill him. And Yosef says, I have no choice. I have to follow my father's request. I cannot stop. And he comes to his brothers, and Shimon and Levi, who were actually the biggest instigators, but they were all pretty much, all except Reuven. They were all basically out to kill Yosef. And when Yosef approached them, they got ready to kill him. And the excuse was, or the quote-unquote accusation is that Yehuda is their king. He was already considered the king of the brothers. And Yosef, by telling the dreams, was rebelling against and treason against the king. That was their excuse, and they were literally about to kill him. Who stopped them? Reuven. Reuven stopped the brothers from killing him and said, how could we spill innocent blood? Let us throw him into the pit. And it says that Reuven's intentions were that he would come later and save Yosef from the pit. He knew that they wouldn't agree to save him, to let Reuven save him. So Reuven's plan was, let's have Yosef thrown into the pit, save his life, and then I'll come by later at night and I will rescue him from the pit. And that's what they did. They threw him into the pit. Let's take a look at the sequence of events. We're going to come back to this one. I want to first focus on the story of Yosef selling. So here's what happens. This is from the text, going back several Torah portions, but here's the text of the story. So one brother says to the other, here comes the dreamers. In other words, the one who tells us the dreams about himself being king. So now let us kill him, and we will cast him into the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams. So they were all planning on killing him. But Reuven heard, and he saved him from their hands, and he said, let us not deal him a deadly blow, let's not kill him. And Reuven said, do not shed blood, cast him into this pit, which is in the desert, but do not lay a hand on him, in order to save him from their hands and to return him to his father. In other words, the Torah itself, even though Rashi elaborates, the Torah itself confirms that Reuven's intentions were to eventually rescue him from the pit and bring him back to his father. And that's what they did. Reuven is a hero. He just saved Joseph's life. What happens next? I'm sorry, we're going to come back to this. What happens next? Yehuda says something very interesting. Yehuda says, wait a second. We're not benefiting at all from Yosef lying in a pit. And we're not benefiting at all from Yosef being killed. There's no benefit. Let's do this. Let's sell him as a slave to the travelers who eventually sold him to Egyptians, and at least we'll make some money off of him. We'll have benefit to it. Why should we kill him or throw him into a pit and not have any benefit? Let's benefit and let's profit off of getting rid of Yosef. So 2 birds with 1 stone. We'll get rid of him, and we will profit as well. I guess modern human trafficking, or sorry, not modern, but the original human trafficking. Now, where was Reuven when Yehuda said this? Where was Reuven? How come? Because that's what happened. They took him out of the pit. They sold him into slavery. But I thought Reuven was going to come and save him. Where was he? So the Medrash tells us Reuven was repenting for his original sin of moving Yaakov's bed into Leah's tent, and he was in the middle of praying and fasting with sackcloth and ashes. So he wasn't there. And actually, the Torah says when he came back to try to save Yosef, he broke down in tears and said, oh, what's going to be? What's going to be? Yosef is gone. And only then did his brothers tell him what really happened. Here the Torah says, and Reuven returned to the pit, and behold, Yosef was not in it. So what did he do? He rent his garment, he tore his garments, and he returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone. And in Hebrew, it sounds better than English, so I'm going to say it in Hebrew. Hayelad einenu, va'ani ana aniva. Where do I go? What do I do? In other words, what do I tell our father? Our father's going to be broken. Okay, that is Reuven. What do you all think of Reuven? Pretty good guy, right? Pretty solid dude. Saves Yosef's life. Heartbroken when Yosef is nowhere to be found, and completely devastated by the fact that he was sold into slavery. Reuben's a good guy, no? What about Yehuda? Yehuda is a human trafficker. One of the worst crimes you can actually think of. So how come Yaakov is giving the kingdom forever to Yehuda and sort of criticizing Reuven for his impulsiveness, and that's why he cannot be a king? Let's go back to some Yehuda text, and let's take a look at who Yehuda is. So we agree that Reuven's a good guy, right? And if anyone disagrees, please let me know. But Reuven looks like a solid dude here. Sorry, I'm gonna do all slides, and that way I can find it better. I think it's here. Okay, this is Yehuda. Let's give the story some context. This is talking about the story of Yehuda and Tamar, which we studied about a few weeks ago. But just as a quick refresher, Yehuda had 3 sons. The oldest son married a girl named Tamar, who was very, very beautiful, and he passed away. His name was and he passed away. And according to Jewish law, if a husband passes away without having any children, the brother is supposed to marry the wife, the widow, to build his brother's household. Of course, the option that we do these days is called chalitza, which is like a divorce ceremony. So Oinon, who is Er's brother, Yehuda's second son, marries Tamar, and he also dies. And there's a backstory to it. They both sinned, and that's why they died. But the point is, they both died. So Yehuda had a third son named Shelah, but Shelah didn't want to marry Tamar because they thought she's cursed. All of her husbands die, and Yehuda didn't want to disagree. So basically, Yehuda told Tamar to go sit in her father's house until Shelah grows up, and didn't really have any plans to marry Tamar to Shelah. Then Yehuda was taking care of his sheep, and Tamar posed as a prostitute and enticed Yehuda to be with her. As we studied in the story, Yehuda actually married her according to halacha, according to Judaism, even though he didn't know who she was. He didn't know that this was his daughter-in-law. They got married. She got pregnant, and when before they were together, Tamar asked, "What will you give me?" In other words, what will you consummate this marriage with? And he's promised her, "I'm going to give you my stick, I'm going to give you my belt, and I'm going to give you," what was the third thing? "I'm going to give you my ring." And those were the the cloak, staff, and the ring, and the signet ring. And those were the 3 things that Yehuda basically became married to Tamar with. But he didn't know that it was Tamar. He didn't know it was his daughter-in-law. And when Tamar became pregnant, even though she was not with Shelah, she still wasn't allowed to get married because she was still technically promised for Shelah, or she was still somewhat married to Shelah because they didn't have a chalitza ceremony. And because Tamar's father was Shem, who was the Kohen, who was the high priest, so she was about to be taken out for execution because of adultery. I know it sounds harsh, but we'll put that aside for a few minutes. So as she's being taken out to be executed, she realized that she can easily save herself if she says that Yehuda is the father of this child. She could say it because it wasn't just with random anybody; it was with the family that she was married to. But she didn't want to embarrass him. So what did she do? She said, "The father is the owner of this cloak, this signet ring, and this staff." And Yehuda immediately recognized it, and he immediately admitted that the baby is mine, and saved her life. The Torah actually learns from this, by the way, that it's better to be killed than to embarrass someone, as we learned from Tamar, that she didn't want to embarrass Yehuda, and if Yehuda wasn't going to admit what he did, then Tamar was willing to be executed instead of embarrassing Yehuda. And from this, we learn that we have to be so careful with other people's feelings. It's better to be killed than to embarrass someone like that. Just a little side note. So this is one aspect of Yehuda, is that he admitted to the fact that he was the father of Tamar's baby and he saved her life. Okay, very nice. Good. This is a king. This is like, where is the character of Yehuda that Yaakov says? Let's go back to that text. What Yaakov said about him. Gur Aryeh. Sorry, not here. Here. Gur Aryeh. You're a grown lion, a cub and a grown lion. In other words, this powerful man of Yehuda. But where do we see that? Where do we see this strength of Yehuda that made him worthy of not just being king, but that all of his descent, that is, the kingdom will always be among his descendants? So who is Yehuda? What is Yehuda? So now let's do some of the text, the explanations here that we skipped. So Rashi explains, Yaakov was telling Reuben that as his firstborn, his tribe was supposed to be the superior one, the one designated to fill the seat of the Jewish monarchy. Alas, due to his restlessness, his impulsiveness, he sinned, and in so doing, he forfeited the privilege of kingship forever. Wow, that's harsh. Now, what about Yehuda? All right. Yehuda's courage to publicly admit his sin and bear the humiliation rather than someone to her death, earned him and his descendants the privilege of Jewish monarchy. Okay, but that doesn't seem relevant. I mean, Reuven's crime, Reuven's sin, and Yehuda's I guess positive character trait here doesn't seem to be worthy enough of Reuven's punishment and Yehuda's reward. So let us take this a little bit further. Okay. Let us talk about what it means to be a king and what is the true definition of leadership. And this is where we start getting into the uncomfortable discussion. Okay. And I want to preface it with something that happened this week. As many of you know, I'm a sports fan, so I'm going to use a sports analogy. Earlier this week, there was a football game, and there was a football player. I forgot his name. I think his first name was Damar. The football player collapsed on the field and stopped breathing, and he had to be taken to the hospital. Thank God, I think he's doing a lot better now. But it was really interesting. I found out about this because I saw a lot of notifications came up on different sports news sites, and everybody, I mean, I'm talking everybody from not just the football world, but from all sports, from all politicians to just about everyone, got up to say something or make a statement and prayers. And the game happened in Cincinnati, so the player that got hurt was playing for Buffalo. And the opposing team is Cincinnati, and the game happened in Cincinnati. The tallest building in Cincinnati was turned from orange, which is the team's color, the Cincinnati color, to the Buffalo's color, blue, in solidarity. Every single football team changed their social media cover photos to this player. Everybody had a statement, and every coach and any politician who spoke started off with a prayer for this player who got hurt. All very good. Nothing wrong with any of this. It's all very touchy feel. It's all very heartwarming, and thank God the player is okay. And I'm not saying anything wrong about that. But all of those reactions is Reuben. Reuben is like his grandfather, his great-grandfather, Abraham, is the attribute of kindness. Kindness is a flow, chesed, is a flow of positive energy. We all want to be a Reuben. We all want to be the nice guy, the nice person that everyone likes to talk to and is just full of kindness and always doing kindness. We love Reubens. When we see a Reuben, boy, girl, man, woman, they exist in all genders. We're excited. That's a sweetheart. That's someone who cares. Someone who you could feel their emotional support that they have towards other people, full of kindness. We want to elect leaders that are Reubens. That's why politicians work so hard to tell us that they're a Reuben. I care. I'm someone who gives, who does, who cares for people. Everybody wants to be a Reuben. Comes Yaakov Avinu, comes Yaakov, the patriarch of the Jewish people, and says, he can't be king. Be a Reuben. Reuben's a good guy, but he can't be king. He can't be the leader. Be a Reuben. There's a need for Reuben. Reubens are very important, but they can't be a leader. Who do I want as a leader of the Jewish people? I want Yehuda. What is Yehuda? Let's talk about Yehuda. Now that we finished talking about Reuben for a few minutes, let's talk about Yehuda. Yehuda is a little bit withdrawn. If we look at the text before, I want to I'm sorry that I'm jumping around here, but this is important. If you look at the text of Yaakov's praise to Yehuda, look at this word here in the second line. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. What does that mean? The teref b'ni alisa, you're withdrawn. In other words, you withdrew. You're an introvert. I'm not sure that's what it means, but what's this withdrawn that we're talking about? Yehuda's a bit aloof. He's not emotionally attached to anything specific. Let's understand this by talking about the 10 sfirot. Okay, I should have prepared a graph. Maybe there is one coming up. No, there isn't, so we'll go back. But we know there's a 10 sfirot. The first 3 are intellectual, so we'll skip those 3 because we're not talking about intellect now. The following 6 sfirot, the following 6 attributes are all emotional. What are they? Chesed, kindness. Gevura, discipline. It's also an emotion. It's not expressed as an emotion, but it is an emotion. Tiferes is beauty. Netzach is the drive for victory, the drive to win, the drive to conquer, the drive to, the motivation. Hod is submission, but it's not just submission. It's more of a it's not even though it comes from the word submission, but it's more of like a I'm trying to think of the right word here, but it's like a character. It's like your defined character. It's like you know how people like to define themselves by their horoscope. What do you call it? The horoscope sign. What's the right word for this? Zodiac signs. In other words, they want to like define themselves by these certain categories. So Hod is like, it's that you put yourself into this group and you ascribe to that group and you want to follow. It's like, that's why it's submissive. It's somewhat submissive, but it's not really pure submission. It's more of like identification. You want to feel like you are somebody. You want to feel like you're part of something. And that's like the emotion of height. Then there's your side. Your side is foundation or foundational, which is not, it's not necessarily an emotion, but it's an emotion. It's an emotional characteristic where you're grounded in specific ideals, and your emotions stem from that. We're not going to tackle each emotion. We could talk about those for the 6 emotions for days. But after the 6, so we have the first 3, which are intellectual. The next 6 are emotional. And then there's the last one, and that's called malchus. Malchus is kingship. Malchus does not have a characteristic. In the description of all of the 10 sfirot, the 10 attributes, the 10 character traits that God created as a way to reflect his his self, in other words, in what he endowed into this world, Malchus doesn't really have a identity. And the previous Rebbe explains this. This is very important to understand. So I'm going to read it in English, but please take your time with the text because this is a very foundational point. The sephira, the attribute, the character trait of Malchus, which is, I guess, translated as royalty, is different from all other sefirot. This can be explained in terms of the qualities of the human soul. In the case of the attribute of kindness, it can exist even if there is no beneficiary of that generosity. Someone could be kind even if there's no one to be kind to. One who is inherently a good person has a goodness and kindness in their heart. And if they happen to encounter someone who needs it, then they will extend that kindness and goodness, but it still exists already within them. However, this internal quality of kindness can manifest as a feeling, even if it isn't directed at anyone per se, as seen in the case of the patriarch Abraham, who always experienced the feeling of kindness. And therefore, after Abraham's circumcision, when Hashem made it exceptionally hot outside to dissuade passerbys from burdening Abraham, it bothered him because he wanted to show kindness. Because the kindness was a manifest within him, he wanted to express his kindness. We love that, don't we? However, the attribute of royalty, which is the sole quality of preeminence, cannot exist without another person. Malchus needs to have a recipient. As we see with an empire, someone who's lost in a barren desert, devoid of other people, does not experience the attribute of Malchus. Okay. Let's explain this in a more simple fashion. Malchus is a communicator. Malchus is a communicator tool, right? Think of speech. Speech is Malchus. Why? Because we have thoughts, we have things that go on in our head, we have feelings and whatever. How do we communicate that to other people? With speech, body language, also speech. In other words, all those things are Malchus. Malchus is the communicator from one to the other. It's the lowest because it has to take what already exists and communicate it to another person or another entity. A king, unlike what the what Hollywood or history wants to tell us about kings, a king is actually completely dependent on their people. If the generals, if the subjects decide they don't want this king, the king is overthrown. The king is 100% dependent on the people, on the nation. So what does it mean to be a king? A king has to be in tune with the people, because without the people, he has nothing. The king has to understand the people. The king has to be 100% bought into what who the people are, what the people need, and how to give it to them. By definition, being a king means presiding over the people and leading them. Royalty is meaningless, and in fact, it cannot exist unless there's a subordinate nation over whom someone is king. So what does this have to do with Yehuda? Let's go on a little bit, and we're going to get to it. A nation appoints the king, and the king, by the way, this is from the Medrash, and the king cannot appoint himself if they do not appoint him. If a person decides, hey, I'm your king, unless the people actually want that king, why should they listen to him? He'll threaten them. Okay, so they'll listen until the threat is no longer a threat, and then they'll overthrow the king. That's not a king. That just means that someone else had a stronger army or a stronger fear factor, but that's not a king. A king is when the people want this king to be their king, this person to be their king. The Rambam actually explains what does it mean? What does a king have? What is the duty of a king? Just as the Torah had granted the king great honor and obligated everyone to revere the king, so too the Torah commands the king to be lowly and empty at heart, as it is written regarding King David, my heart is void with me. Nor should he treat Israel with an overbearing haughtiness, as it is written, he should not lift up his heart above his brothers. He should be gracious and merciful to the small and to the great, involving himself in their good and welfare. He should protect the honor or even of even the humblest of men. When he speaks to the people as a community, he should speak gently, as it is written, listen, my brothers and my people. Similarly, it is written, if today you will be a servant to these people, you should always conduct himself with great humility. Okay. So what is a king? I'm sorry. What is the core attribute of a king? A king cannot be drawn in one specific direction. A king cannot be distracted or overtaken with a specific request or bias. A king has to be withdrawn. I'm going to go back to that football example. So while everyone else, and I don't know exactly what happened, I just noticed this and it stuck out with me a little bit. But when everyone else was all lining up to be a Reuven and to be the compassionate one and the one who's praying for this player and thinking about this player and and being the hero for this player, somebody actually has to think about, okay, what are we going to do now? We canceled the game. Are we going to, what's the next step? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? How do we make sure that this, how do we find out what the cost? Someone has to actually be leading the next steps. And that person has to be a person that has the strength and fortitude to take a step back and be able to make a decision. And not just on emotions, but with all the facts and with the full big picture. Why do we always say that, someone has to have, be a visionary or have a big picture approach in order to lead, in order to succeed? Because if you're zeroed in on a very specific area of focus or a very specific area of interest or of a hobby or whatever it is, you can't, unbiasedly see the bigger picture. That's what we need from a king. Because the king, with that unbiased big picture approach, could actually get something done and actually make decisions that have to happen. Think about a president of a country, let's say the president of the United States. Don't think of a specific president, because we don't want to make this, you don't want to make this political in your mind, even in your mind. But think of a president of the United States, all right? Something crazy happens, like 9/11 or a war, World War II. Think of all the different crazy calamities that have happened, or think of one that hasn't happened, but God forbid could. So there's the obvious emotional reactions of, here's what we got to do, or all the things. But what you really want from a president is the president to be able to have the brain space and the bandwidth and the ability to take a step back and be able to make a decision and, be decisive, but at the same time, be decisive with all the information and be decisive in a full comprehensive way, not just an emotional response. They have to think through what's going to be the implication of their actions. They have to think through every single step of it. And that's what you want from a president in a time of crisis. So Yaakov is really telling Reuven, you're a good guy. You're a sweetheart. Your kindness is beautiful and overwhelming. But I can't put you in charge because you're too instinctive. I need someone withdrawn. We need someone who has bigger picture focus and is able to make those tough decisions in tough times. Because that's what a king is. Let's go further. This is a fascinating concept, and one that, we're gonna unwrap it, but it's one that takes a lot of understanding to fully grasp. So the Rebbe explains further. Reuven had the restlessness of water and the hastened display to his anger, as concluding that his father's bed belonged to Leah's tent. He got upset at someone else and acted swiftly and immediately to interfere with his father's bed, thus hurting another person. This behavior is the opposite of helping others. All right, so therefore that's how you can see it as a negative. But what's really the difference? The difference between Yehuda's withdrawing from the prey and Reuven is this. When Yehuda withdrew from the prey, he actually saved another person. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's go back to the story of Yosef, right? Reuven is the hero. Remember the story that we just talked about? Reuven saved his life, and he even had a plan. Throw him into the pit, and I'm going to come by later to save him. Reuven is the good guy. But what did Reuven do after Yosef was thrown in the pit? He went and he prayed and he fasted to repent for his own sin. Wait a second. Somebody's life is at stake. So you're a good guy, so now you're done. What Yehuda did is actually what saved Yosef's life. He may have been a human trafficker. On the books, it looks terrible. But he also knew that he is the leader of these people who want to kill him. So he can't say, let's free him, because then he'll no longer be king. And he'll be useless. And he definitely won't be able to save him at that point. So Yehuda had to have a strategy that will actually save Yosef's life and will appease the brothers, his subjects. And that actually worked. And it got the job done. It saved Joseph's life. While Reuven was praying with his sackcloth and ashes. Let's read this. Second paragraph. When Yehuda said, "What is the gain?" he saved Joseph from his brother's plan to kill him. And he took him out of the pit, which contained snakes and scorpions. Although Reuven's intentions were nobler than Yehuda's, Reuven is the hero. He's the one who wanted to save Joseph. That has to do with his own personal qualities and nothing to do with his ability to benefit and save others. Just because Reuven was a nicer guy doesn't mean he could save people. He tries, but he's not always successful because it's more about kindness and it's more about Reuven's kindness than it is about the results. So when he says, "Let us not deal him a deadly blow, cast him into the pit in order to save him from their hands, to return him to his father," it tells us about his intentions. But practically, it didn't work because it did not save Joseph from danger of starving to death or being bitten by a deadly snake in the pit. As we know, there were snakes and scorpions in the pit. What Yehuda did, as evil as it sounds, actually saved Joseph's life. Why is this so? Why is this so? I'm sorry. Why is this so revolutionary? Because in our society, and this is crucial. This is the punchline that we have to take from this parsha and from this Sicha of the Rebbe. Everybody wants to feel good. Okay. We go to shul sometimes because we want to feel connected. We want to feel like we did good. We do a mitzvah sometimes because we want to feel good. Or we forget about that for a second. When we look at other people, we are inspired by other people who do good, who have all these good intentions, give all these good speeches, and have the best, social media where they're just talking about how much good they do. We love that. We love Reuven's. Reuven's gets the most likes on Facebook and Instagram. Reuven is the one that is the ultimate woke hero. I don't mean woke, but I mean like Reuven is the guy. He's the one we all want, we all like. We can't stand Yehuda. Yehuda's cold. He's withdrawn. He doesn't feel what we feel. He makes tough decisions, but he credit to him for making tough decisions, but it doesn't have any feel good to it. It doesn't make us feel good. So we don't like Yehudas. Here comes Yaakov Avinu, and the Rebbe explaining what Yaakov's blessing really means to Yehuda. Yehuda, you are the king forever. Your tribe is the king forever. What does that mean? We love Reuven. Reuven should live long and exist, and there should be many Reuvens. But we need someone like Yehuda who actually gets results, who actually gets the job done, who actually makes the difference, even if it's not pretty, even if it's not full of emotional feelings and beautiful attributes and memes and everything else that goes along with it. But they get the job done. That is Yehuda. And that's why Yehuda has to be in charge. Reuven, there could be many Reuvens. Many of us are Reuvens. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to learn to look towards Yehuda when we need results. When we need results, Reuven will tell us and give us speeches and seminars about how important it is to be kind and fix the problems. It doesn't do anything. We need a Yehuda. We need a doer. We need someone who is an action, results-oriented person. That's the leader that we need. They're not always pretty. They're not always the best spoken. They're not always, they're not always the touchy-feely kind of person that everyone relates to. But they get it. They have the full picture. And they, most importantly, are focused on getting the job done. Very often, in many instances, there are leaders, not just in the Jewish community, but beyond, that have to make tough decisions. There were presidents, there were kings, there were prime ministers that had to make some tough decisions at many points in history that had a lot of foresight in the sense that it wasn't an emotional, popular decision, but it was a decision that needed to be made in order to, at least what they thought would be able to have the results that were intended. That's a leader. And a leader needs to be able to do that. A leader needs to be able to not focus as much as on the emotional response, but on the effect and the impact and the results. Now, even if we are a Reuven, even if, let's say, a Reuven is our character trait, it doesn't mean we cannot apply the Yehuda factor to it. So let's not make this about who is a Reuven and who is the Yehuda as much as it is. Right now, we need to get something done. Something has to be done. So let's think Yehuda terms and not Reuven terms. If somebody needs to we need someone to make a good speech, okay, we'll find a Reuven. But if we need a leader, we need someone who's going to get stuff done, we need a Yehuda. Or if we want to get something done, we need to apply the Yehuda method. What is the Yehuda method? It's focusing on results. What is this actually going to accomplish? I'm going to go back to sports for a second. So there was a very controversial protest that was done by many football players where they would take a knee during the national anthem to protest some of the what they claim was racial bias. I'm not going to get into the details of that. But the problem with all of that is that's all very Reuven-y in a sense that it's all about touchy-feely, but does it actually help anyone? Does it actually help does it actually change anybody's life? There was a football team that changed their name from Redskins because it might offend people to a new name. But which might be a good thing, it might make sense, but does it help anyone? Does it actually change people's life? Does it get results? And that's why Yehuda has to be in charge. Because Yehuda is asking the question, what are the results? What is going to be the impact? Yehuda is not always the busiest. Yehuda is not always the hardest working person. Sometimes, maybe, but Yehuda is about what has to get done and how are we going to get it done? What's going to be the results? What's going to be the impact of our actions? Let's go further. I want to go we're going to draw this in a little bit more home. So why was Reuben so worried about Yosef? Because he realized that if anything happened to Yosef, the sin would be attributed only to me. It seems that he was more worried about his own reputation than about Yosef's well-being, which technically is one of the flaws of a Reuben, is that even though they really do and have good intentions, they mean well, sometimes they get caught up in their own reputation or their own aspirations that it sometimes will lead them astray. If you look at the verse that we read before about what happened to what did Reuben say after he saw that Yosef was gone? What did he say? And where will I go? Yosef is missing and he's worried about where will I go? Once again, we're not trying to beat up on Reuben, but we're trying to point out the flaw in being overcome in a sense that we're emotionally driven. Emotionally driven could sometimes lead us astray. And that's why a Reuben cannot be a king, cannot be a leader. A Reuben can do a lot of good, but a Reuben can't be a leader. We're going to bring another example here. So when the brothers went to visit Yosef, and they went to when they went to Egypt to get food during the famine. So when Yosef was torturing them and making them pay for their sin. So look at this verse number 21. And the brothers said to one another, and the Medrash tells us that it was actually Yehuda who said this. Indeed, we are guilty for our brother, as we witnessed the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this trouble has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, didn't I tell you, I warned you, do not sin against this, do not sin against Yosef. But you did not listen. Behold, his blood too is being demanded. So here's the question. Why would Reuben, they already were feeling bad about it. What was Reuben's point of trying to nudge them on further? So the Orach Chaim gives one answer, that this was his response to their statement that the reason this trouble befell them was because they failed to have compassion upon their brother when he begged them. In this reason, they included Reuben. Reuben thus responded and told them that he did not have a part of this sin, because didn't I tell you? I warned you. But there's another commentary that says that Reuben was just trying to get them to repent a little further and deeper. But the point is that Reuben is still somewhat self-centered. His kindness has somehow gotten a hold of him in a sense that he puts himself at the center a little bit too much. Now let's talk about the actions of repentance. And this is how we're gonna conclude. So Reuven sinned by moving his father's bed from Bilhah's tent to Leah's tent by basically messing with his father's intimacy. And he fasted and prayed for 9 years. And then eventually he confessed publicly to his brothers. Yehuda confessed publicly that he was the one that impregnated Tamar. And the Medrash tells us that it was Yehuda's confession that inspired Reuven to confess to his own sin, at least publicly. What is so special about Yehuda's confession that he was the one that was with Tamar? Like, why was that so hard? Back to that question about Yehuda, what was so special about Yehuda? So let's fast forward to King David. King David, when he sinned with Bathsheba, which was definitely a sin that is very, very hard for us to understand as a king, for someone to commit something like that. And he was approached by Nathan Hanavi, by Nathan the prophet, and he was given the whole metaphor of the land, of the poor person with the sheep. And Nathan Hanavi told him that he sinned and that he messed up, and that he's going to have to forfeit his life. And what did David say? What was King David's one word, or actually two words? He didn't say, you can't really compare. I didn't really know. It's not what I meant to do. I had good intentions. I was really deep down. I'm a nice guy. He said two words, Chatasi lahashem. I have sinned to God. And then he went on to fast and pray for 26 years. I'm not saying that undoes his sin. But what we are saying is that there's a certain value in leadership that Yehuda's confession and David's confession attribute to what a leader really is. A leader is not perfect. A leader doesn't always make good decisions. A leader doesn't there have been many kings, presidents, prime ministers who made terrible decisions, even though, it was with the full picture or whatever. But the one core value that Yehuda has here with his confession, and that David has with his confession, think back to King Shaul, that when King Shaul didn't wait for Shmuel before he went to war, or when he didn't execute all the Amalekites the way he was instructed by Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet. And then when Samuel the prophet approached him and asked him, what happened? Why didn't you do what you were supposed to do? And he said, the people. Even though Shaul HaMelech really didn't do anything wrong, Shaul HaMelech was perfect. But what's the one attribute that Yehuda has and King David has, is that it's not about them. I'm a bad guy. I'm not a good guy. I'm not. Chatasi. I'm a sinner. I'm an adulterer. I'm a human trafficker, in this case of Yosef with Yehuda. I'm not a good guy. I'm not trying to be a good guy. I'm not trying to build up a reputation. I'm not trying to build up a resume. I'm not trying to get votes. I'm trying to get stuff done. And to save Tamar's life, confess. To save the Jewish people from a plague, confess. Do what it takes. Breaking news, I'm a bad guy. Of course I'm a nobody. It's not about me. I have to do what needs to be done to get the job done. Too often, it's human nature to be self-centered. It's human nature to be our own biggest advocate, and to stand up for ourselves and put ourselves in the center. But what makes Yehuda so special, what makes that idea so special, it's not that they're perfect. It's not that they don't make bad decisions. It's not that they don't sin. They do. They're full of it. They have plenty of skeletons in the closet. But they also have the sense of when they're in a leadership role, it's not about them. And that's why the king has to be Yehuda. The king has to be a descendant of Yehuda. In other words, that character trait. It's not about them. Let's get stuff done. What has to get done needs to get done. Well, if it means I'm a sinner, fine. If it means it's not about me. Stuff has to get done. That is the bottom line. So I'm not going to read the rest of the text, even though there's some more text, because it's really just, it's affirming what we talked about. If you have the textbooks, you're welcome to read it. But what I want to just end off with is, in our own lives, we have to focus on results. We have to focus on the end. We don't have time for emotions and would have, could have, should have. We don't have time for that. We have to get something done. We have to think about what is going to bring the results. If we're in a community, we have to think what is going to get the job done. If we have to appoint someone a leader of a community, or a leader of a family, or the leader of whatever, we have to think who is the person that is going to get the job done. Not who is the nicest person, not who is the holiest person, not who is the greatest person or the strongest. Who's going to get the job done? Who knows how to put themselves aside and get the job done? That's a king. And that's what Yaakov is telling Yehuda and giving him the blessing. Not because he's a better guy. Reuben's the sweetheart. But Yehuda gets stuff done. And that is the ultimate, what Judaism wants. As we all know from the case of the Rambam, if you lose money and a poor person finds it, you are credited with the mitzvah. Why? Because you got something done. Some poor person had dinner because of you. There was a result. There was an impact. You didn't have an intention? Okay, next time you will. But it's not about you. It never was about you. Be a king. It's about results. It's about impact. It's about getting stuff done. That is the ultimate message. Shabbos, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have any questions. And once again, thank you for being here.